less successful in being charismatic and duping people.
Now,
oh, God, I'm just, you know, honestly, I'm just glad this fell off, dude. I like, actually, oh my God. I'm putting the Che video in the bag.
search Che Guevara on YouTube. You'll be greeted with an overwhelming amount of videos calling him a murderer, psychopath, homophobe, racist, and so on.
You're wearing a mass murderer t-shirt.
He personally murdered or had murdered thousands of Cuban citizens.
It's like walking around, again, with a Stalin t-shirt.
There exists
I don't want to simp too hard for China. Human violations are a serious issue, but do you really think that separatism is something that you can deal with just improving social conditions? Not just improving social conditions, but if someone actually engages in an act of terror, then you prosecute them for the crimes that they've committed. You don't. My point is, under no circumstances can you go after virtually the entirety of an ethnic minority and place them under mass surveillance and then send numerous members of said ethnic minority into re-education camps because you want to completely eviscerate the separatist threat. That is my approach and issue with this process. Kind of like you can't just decide that every undocumented migrant is a criminal because 29 undocumented migrant murders happened in the year 2024.
There's very few well thought out rebuttals to these claims on this website. The videos on the screen right now are really good in my opinion, but they're unfortunately drowned out by the slander. I get a lot.
Yeah, but migrant crime is completely made up. While there are East Turkestan flags being raised right now in Syria by the Friends of Liberal Al-Qaeda, yes, they are trained by the Turkish government. I am very familiar with the East Turkestan separatist movement. They are literally trained and armed by way of the CIA and my other country that I am from, Turkey. I know. I'm very aware of this. Okay? Once again, that is not a reason or an ample justification for mass surveillance, dragnet operations, and also, re-education camps. It's pre-crime. There's no justification for pre-crime. That's it.
A lot of comments from people who are curious as to why I keep a portrait of a supposed tyrannical mass murdering bigot in my living room, especially since I emphasize democracy so much in my videos, and that's because he's not a mass murderer.
Why aren't you mentioning how funny it is that West always act like they care about Muslims to begin with? Yeah. Wasn't that like some Chinese foreign minister who was like, Westerners, from what I've seen so far, don't particularly like the Chinese very much, and they don't particularly like the Muslims very much. But goddamn, they always talk about the Chinese Muslims. It's true.
In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single verifiable instance of him killing even one innocent person. The lack of knowledge when it comes to Che Guevara is evident. There are countless YouTube historians who can't even get the dude's birthday right, yet somehow feel the need to fill you in on the truth about Che Guevara.
Ernesto Che Guevara was born June 14th, 1928 in
And he was a racist baby. Look at how racist his face is. I will not be looking into what he did for the second half of his life. Okay? That seems like a racist, violent baby.
Rosario, Argentina.
Yes, although Wikipedia will tell you that his birthday was June 14th, his actual birthday was a month earlier, on May 14th. We know this because the most acclaimed biography on Che, written by John Lee Anderson, explains how Che's own mother admitted this fact to an astrologer on the literal first page of the book. If you're gonna make a truth about Che Guevara video, don't you think you should at least skim what is considered to be one of the most significant pieces written about the man? I don't bring this up to be pedantic. Anderson is such an important journalist on the topic of Guevara that he is credited with literally helping to find Che's remains after 30 years. He might be worth the read. This may seem like a small detail I'm obsessing over, but it's emblematic of the greater lack of respect for this topic. So, in this video, I'll take the 3 big accusations levied against Guevara, that he was a mass murderer, racist, and a homophobe, and refute each claim. Was Che Guevara a murderer? Well, the good folks over at PragerU sure seem to think so. They also like to draw Che as though he was a brown person for some reason, even though he was a white dude with Irish and Spanish ancestry. I guess drawing the guy with a darker complexion while trying to paint him as a terrorist plays well with their conservative base. Anyway, for those unfamiliar with Guevara's story, he was born into a well-off family in Argentina with a
Rich socialist, god damn it, dude. Thank God my goat Engels was never, he never actually do the crime of being a wealthy person.
A bad case of asthma. He was very
Fake socialist, god damn it, piece of shit, hypocrite.
and he studied to become a doctor. When he was in his early 20s, he and his friend decided to go on a trip from Argentina all the way up to North America so they could experience the world around them. On this trip, Che saw the immense suffering and poverty in Latin America, and he understood the culprit to be US corporations and imperialism that looted the lands and marginalized the indigenous peoples. He even witnessed the US-led overthrow of democratically.
Yeah, hopefully Castro didn't have like wealthy parents or anything, because that would be really, that would make me extra mad about these hypocritical socialists.
Elected Guatemalan president Jacobo Arbenz because American corporations wanted to continue expropriating Guatemalan land and fruit. This trip radicalized Che and ultimately led to his involvement in the overthrow of the US-backed Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista in 1959.
A good guy. He's going to say he's a good guy, right? Batista, he's our guy. He was our good guy. I sure hope he does an accurate depiction of events here.
He played a pivotal role in the Cuban Revolution alongside Fidel Castro and the rest of his rebel army. Now, before I go any further, this video is not about Fidel. A lot of people like to conflate the two men when discussing Che's record and argue that since they perceive Fidel to be a terrible, evil man, then it must follow that Che was too. Apart from the fact that Fidel's story is nuanced and shouldn't be touched on as a side note, Che and Fidel were very different people. Fidel wasn't even a communist at the time of the revolution. He actually stacked his new government with relatively conservative people in the attempt to placate the hostile USA. Yes, many mistakes were made by Fidel in the years that followed the revolution, and yes, a lot of them were in response to the US invasion, bombing, and embargo of his country. But for the sake of brevity, this video will focus on Che. Similarly, there are bad faith actors who like to conflate Che with the Cuban state itself and attribute any wrongdoing committed by the state to Che. Every country has its own flawed history in some way. We're not going to blame Guevara for Cuba's unless he was directly involved. Back to this very well done and totally not dishonest PragerU video. As you can see, they are kind enough to link us to a source document which I happily clicked through in the hopes of finding some new and damning information on Che. As I dealt with the source material and tried to—
I love PragerU taking the time out of like 17 videos about how black people ain't, and that if you think black people, deserve equal rights, you also ain't, to turn around and be like, Che Guevara, I'll have you know, had some really famous choice words about the laziness of black people, which we agree with, by the way, all the time right now in 2025, even though please don't look into what Che Guevara did for the remainder of his life, okay, post-revolution. It's such a funny thing for PragerU to be like, yeah, Che Guevara was racist against black people. Like, what are you trying to hype him up to the PragerU audience? Anyway.
Trace the claims back to their original sources. It did not take me long before I arrived at—
Yeah, also, if Che was actually racist, conservatives would love him. Exactly. And not only that, I mean, that goes for everyone that conservatives claim, or even liberals sometimes claim are maintaining reactionary, problematic statements. Like, I can see your other posts, dip. The f do you mean you're calling Che Guevara a racist?
At cubaarchive.org. If you've ever had a conversation with someone set on convincing you that Che was a mass murderer, they might have told you to check out this site. I know a lot of op-eds on the topic like to use Cuba Archive as a source, like this HuffPost article. Researchers have documented 216 victims of Che Guevara in Cuba from 1957 to 1959. Wow, I gotta check this out. Oh nice, an Error 404 page. That's some good-ass journalism right there. In almost every slanderous article or blog post I read on the topic of Guevara, any definitive claim that Che killed X amount of people would redirect me to Cuba Archive, specifically this 404 error page. Now, this is
Bro, when the USAID funding dries up.
obviously a dead end. The page was taken down for some reason, probably due to blatant dishonesty, but as I researched this topic further, I'm almost certain that this page is the one being debunked in a 4-year-old video by a YouTuber called Bad Empanada, where he goes in depth on the topic and does a really good job highlighting how dishonest Cuba Archive can be. I definitely recommend you check it out if you want more on this topic. As of 2025, Cuba Archive is still home to a database that lists the names and cases of people who died or disappeared under both Batista and Castro.
Do you not bring up the decimation of Uyghur culture and heritage because it doesn't fit well into your China glazed narrative. Interesting fact-picking coward. Go back and watch any number of different videos that I've covered on this subject matter from many years ago, and you will hear that I have talked about it, which is why I think it's appropriate to consider it a cultural genocide, as they basically commodified and turned Uyghur culture into a tourism destination. You've also been subscribed to me for 13 months, so I think you've definitely seen me talk about this before. I don't know, like there's no point that where I have ever considered what the Chinese government's handlings of Xinjiang to be appropriate. I don't know why people still keep pointing to this. It's like one of those statements that just like never goes away for some reason. I genuinely don't understand it. Like, is it attention that you're seeking? What is happening? Is that what it is? Like, what the will you now say, oh, my mistake, I didn't realize you had talked about it? Yeah, it's exactly like West Bank. Okay. Yeah, definitely. That's why there's a genuine freedom of freedom of movement restriction to this day. The do you mean it's exactly like West Bank? What kind of delusional bullshit is this, dude? Shut the up. It is incredibly disrespectful to a 76-year apartheid. Like, what are you saying? What are you saying? Yeah, that's the only thing they did in the West Bank, right? They just bulldozed buildings and banned books, right? That's what they did famously. Why are you downplaying what is happening under the first of all, I've literally had people press me IRL in the exact way Chatter is pressing you for saying China good. I'm not even saying China good. I'm just saying there's good things that China has done. But goddamn. But notice how you actually change the dynamic immediately. Like, you know that I've recognized this. Okay? But there's a limit to that recognition when it reaches beyond the point of, when it reaches to the point of just like undermining what's going on in the West Bank, you know, it's ridiculous. I think you kind of downplay the Chinese genocide. I am not downplaying Gaza and Palestine at all. That comparison that you're making is literally downplaying it. Okay? Like if you know anything about either of these issues, if you know anything about either of these atrocities, okay, if you choose to compare them in this way, you are downplaying one over the other 100%. Especially because you also come to the recognition that it's fine now. Is it fine now in the West Bank? Is it fine now? There's 15 million people permanently displaced. What the are you talking about? You know? I don't think if it was to the same degree, you would ever be able to say it's fine now about Gaza or it's fine now about the West Bank. Maybe you should really, reconsider the way that you're comparing these two different events. Anyway, and this is because he considers what my criticism is insufficient, which is ironic because it seems like he agrees with my criticism. How many times have you said that if Israel did Xinjiang and the West Bank, Israel be considered the greatest peacemakers, diplomats of all time? Exactly. Because it's true. It's literally true. You could say it's fine now. Palestinians have complete freedom of movement and a say in the process of their own local governance, for example. Yes, it would be considered the greatest peacekeeping achievement of all time by every Western superpower. They would never shut up about it. Anyway, imagine if Israel discovered a cure for cancer, but people refuse to get it because Israel's doing a genocide. You can talk about good things while acknowledging the bad things. No, Israel has done nothing good for the world. No, I mean, I've even talked about Israel revitalizing in its nationalist project, revitalizing the Hebrew language as a overall benefit. There's plenty of things that would be considered incredible achievements that Israel has done if it wasn't done at the behest of a settler colonial enterprise that engaged in mass displacement and genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid for 76 years. These are things that I also recognize and openly talk about. Anyway, I mean, I've been in the process myself against the war in the past year. I don't need a lecture on the horrors of Palestinian apartheid and genocide. Okay, well, I'm glad that but you always claimed that it was such a peaceful re-education. I've literally never said that. I've never said that it was a peaceful re-education. Now you're just making stuff up because I think you feel embarrassed because you also recognize that your statement was wrong and you're just desperately grabbing onto whatever criticism you can. It's okay. It's all right to have disagreements. It's all right to misunderstand people from time to time. I'm trying to be as gracious as possible here. So what's going on here? I think chatters wish you would denounce the Chinese as strongly as you do the Israelis, since they're just as bad. There is no world where I'm saying the opposite of that, okay? And I'm not talking about Israeli citizens anyway. I'm talking about the Israeli government, okay? And its apartheid structure. There is no world. I'm saying the opposite of what you are saying. If you think that the Chinese unjustifiable, the CCP killed 100 million people. Okay, dumbass. Ridiculous.
Castro's rule, which on its face seems like a useful tool that could help us to further understand the severity of the issue at hand, until we very quickly see that this database is filled with dishonesty and misappropriations of their very own source material. Not to mention, citing
I don't even think the Black Book of Communism says that. Yeah, they don't.
Cuba Archive, a database that covers deaths and disappearances committed by the Cuban state since 1952, doesn't necessarily fill you in on whether or not Che Guevara was the culprit. But to illustrate my point about the misinformation prevalent on this website, let's look at the case of a man who we know for certain Che personally killed because he wrote about it in his diaries. Killed, not murdered. There is a difference, and it's an important one, and we'll get into the distinction in a bit. This is a case that is often used when...
You know what's really funny? Okay, this is the last note I'm going to mention here, okay? If I ever talk about, like, an American politician doing something right, okay, nobody goes, or, well, I guess some people do. They go, oh, how dare you glaze up America, KKK, it is a violent settler colonial enterprise that is built on the backs of genocide and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, people do that sometimes, and I ban them because they're being annoying, okay? But every mention of China has to be prefaced with, like, the, 100 bullet point of all the wrong that China is doing right now to you individually. It's, like, ridiculous. Shut the up. Jesus Christ. I live here, Like, can you imagine? Let's say I'm defending the National Institute of Health for its funding grants, and like chatters are coming in here to be like, "How dare you defend the American genocidal enterprise and the innovative the grants that work to innovate the field of medicine? It is still done at the behest of capital. You Ameripig." Like, yeah, some people do say that. Usually they're anarchists. Annoying, and I ban them. Okay, you do that for China every time, and it's funny because that chatter at least knows what my perspective on China is, and it's things that I criticize, and its governance that I criticize, aspects of his governance, and he's still like, why doesn't the ICC prosecute Xi Jinping? I don't know. Take it up with the ICC, dumbass. Why doesn't the ICC prosecute American leadership? I don't know. Maybe because they don't got smoke like that. This is the first time that they've actually dared go after a Western-backed leader, and you're over here being like, why don't they go after China too? I don't know. Maybe because I explained it to you already. If Benjamin Netanyahu was doing CCP shit to the Palestinians, the ICC would not be going after him. The Nobel Committee would be going after him to find where he is, to suck his... I remember when this was a left-leaning Democrat broadcast. Yeah, pulled out the old one. Right up there with, you have sex with goats. You sand monkey, don't you know? You sand monkey, don't you know Muslims are oppressed in China? Guess you don't care about your own kind of goat when they're in China. Yeah, that's right. Remember the prophet? Anyway, woke racism.
And trying to paint Che as a mass murderer because it's the one instance of a killing that we can actually confirm with a primary source. Eutimio Guerra, Cuba Archive states, was a peasant and rebel army member executed on charges of being a Batista government informant by Che himself. And the source they quote for this is, oh, would you look at that? It's John Lee Anderson's biography. Well, luckily for us, we have a copy of Anderson's book, so we can get that much-needed context directly from the source. Eutimio Guerra was, in fact, a peasant who joined the rebel army to fight against Batista, but he betrayed the rebels and collaborated with the enemy. This led to the rebel army's location being compromised and bombed, and it even led to the death of a rebel guerrilla. It's important to note that treason and betrayal was known to bring a death sentence. That much was made clear before joining the rebels. When Eutimio was captured by the rebels, they found an army safe conduct pass bearing his name and proving he collaborated with the enemy. Eutimio didn't.
I can't believe that while they were engaging in guerrilla warfare against a fascist military dictatorship, they just killed collaborators. That's really up. Yeah, good thing no one else has ever done that throughout history.
Didn't even try to ask for clemency because he was well aware of his crimes and he knew that the punishment for treachery was death. Eutimio got down on his knees, asking that he be shot to have it over with. Now, instead of just brazenly executing him on the spot the way a mass murderer would have no problem doing, Che and the rebels conducted a makeshift trial for Eutimio. They were in the middle of a guerrilla war, so they had to make do with what they could, but he was given a trial nonetheless. Even Cuba Archive nonchalantly admits this. Fidel ultimately gave the order to execute the man who betrayed the army and led to the death of a fellow rebel, and Che, only after seeing that nobody else wanted to carry out the execution, did so. Now you tell me if that constitutes murder. Murder is a legal term encompassing the unlawful killing of an innocent person. This is obviously a tragic story, but murder is not the appropriate word to use. Otherwise, we would have to turn to other nations like the US, who also consider treason to be punishable by death and consider that practice to be murderous.
Americans gained independence by throwing tea into the water or something, and then the English left? Yeah. Famously.
Well, it's very clear that a lot of nuance is stripped away from this case if you just read the Cuba Archive page on it. Like I said, Che's detractors like to publicize the story of Eutimio Guerra because it's the only confirmed case of Che personally killing someone. Like this hit piece written by Alvaro Vargas Llosa that
The Killing Machine. Che Guevara from communist firebrand to capitalist brand. Oh my God. Whenever I see the oldest tricks in the book still being utilized over and over again, and not even for like revolutionary figures at this point, but even someone who's like a Twitch streamer like myself, it's just, I can't help but laugh. You know what I mean? It's like I got no emotion, man. Why are you yelling at me? You know, why the are you yelling at me? I'm not a revolutionary figure, you know? And it's always like, dude, you don't understand. Like you're a rich socialist. Rich socialist? It's hypocritical.
Guevara shot Eutimio Guerra because he suspected him of passing on information. We can see that the author is using vague language here to make Che seem unreasonable. Llosa leaves out the fact that the rebels found an army-safe conduct pass proving definitively that Eutimio was guilty. Little tricks like this are played all over Cuba Archive's database as well. To really drive this home, Guerra betrayed the rebels, colluded with the enemy in a way that led to the death of a rebel guerrilla, was captured, admitted his wrongdoings, asked for death, was given a trial, and was executed for treason. This is not some act of sadistic depravity that Che took pleasure in carrying out. Cuba Archive will touch on similar cases where the rebels, sometimes acting on Che's command, were forced to carry out similar executions of traitors, criminals, and Batista collaborators, and although Cuba Archive uses very ambiguous language describing what happened, I implore you to actually seek out the source material that they use, and you will quickly realize that they often bastardize their own sources to make it seem as though Che was walking around murdering.
Bro, this actually makes him seem like a lazy ass. He killed one dude. No, of course he didn't kill one guy. He only personally executed one person. He killed a bunch of people. They did a violent revolution. I'm saying that, like, they make it seem like he was just lining up and just doming them left and right.
Innocent people.
He was a
Victims,
combatant.
if you could even call them that, were often murderers and torturers of peasants, enemy combatants, or traitors who collaborated with the enemy and compromised the rebels, which would bring a death sentence in the US as well. It's sad to see Che's detractors hyper-focus on such shoddy evidence regarding his supposed mass murder sprees when we have verifiable instances of his work in establishing hospitals, administering medical aid to people, teaching people how to read and write in the effort to combat illiteracy, being an outspoken critic of horrific regimes like that of apartheid South Africa, which we'll get into later in this video when discussing his supposed racism, and more.
I hope he didn't train armed combatants to go up against colonial power. That would be really bad. That would be,
But for now, let's move on to the main point of contention
even
for those
more
who paint
on the murder line, dude.
Che as a mass murderer. his work overseeing the Cuban tribunals after the Batista regime fell. After the revolution was won and the dictator Fulgencio Batista fled the country, a lot of Batista's army men, police, and collaborators remained in Cuba, and like any other war criminals, needed to be tried in tribunals. It's important to note that Batista's rule was genuinely brutal. His forces were guilty of acts so depraved that I can't even mention them in this video. He treated the Cuban population horrendously, with atrocities ranging from torture to mutilation to mass murder. CIA records confirm this and, surprisingly, juxtapose Batista's tyrannical rule with Castro's comparatively sensible one. Quote, "The large-scale campaigns of murders and terrorism characteristic of the last years of the Batista regime have not occurred during the Castro regime." Again, this is not me playing defense for any atrocities that may have occurred under Castro. It just feels like it would be relevant to share what the CIA was saying at the time. It is funny how Cuba had an actual mass-murdering despot at its helm for so many years, yet conservative media rarely brings it up. Castro put Che in charge of trying the war criminals, rapists, murderers, and torturers from the Batista regime. This entailed Che going over their cases and issuing a sentence. This could be compared to any other tribunal. In Che's case, suspected war criminals were brought to La Cabana, a fortress he used as a headquarters and military prison. Those suspected of atrocities, often involving the torture of peasants, sexual abuses, and murders, had their cases looked over by Che and other members tasked with presiding over the tribunals. His work at this fortress has earned Che the nickname, the Butcher of La Cabana, by those who like to misrepresent his legacy and paint him as a careless mass murderer who killed everyone who was brought to him. But the historical record begs to differ. Orlando Borrego, the accountant who administered La Cabana's finances and fellow tribunal president, had this to say about the trials. "Our paramount concern was to ensure that revolutionary morality and justice prevailed." Che was very careful. Nobody was shot for hitting a prisoner, but if there was extreme torture and killings and death, then yes, they were condemned to death. The whole case was analyzed, all the witnesses seen, and the relatives of the dead or tortured person came, or the tortured person himself. In addition to this, Anderson reports that Che never attended the trials or met with defendants himself as to not jeopardize the legal process and intertwine personal vendettas with justice. He just went over the cases with his fellow judges and reached a verdict on the basis of evidence alone. Borrego also mentioned that Che took great care in selecting the judges and prosecutors, and that the rebels who were mistreated—
American liberals, without even a shred of irony, will be like, they should have killed more slavers, okay, during the Civil War. And then we'll turn around and be like, Che is a horrifying mass murderer, a butcher, okay? American liberals, maybe even if they're, crazy enough, if they're goated enough, they're based enough, will say like, the tribunal should have killed more Nazis after World War II. And then we'll then turn around without a shred of irony, be like, Che Guevara was a bloody mass murderer. It is so completely unacceptable what he did. What is going on? Like, what doesn't make sense in your mind? Like, I am anti-capital punishment, okay? But if we're looking at historical events, whether it was revolution in Cuba, or whether it was revolution in Haiti, or whether it was a just war against the Nazi scourge, okay, or whether it was a just war against the rising South filled to the brim with slavers, I understand why people did the things that they did, okay? I'm not going to sit here and be like, nah, I would have gone about it different, okay? I would have worked on making sure that we were doing reform, okay? Making sure that we were doing some rehab, okay? Like, I feel like this is a wholly unproductive conversation, oftentimes had by liberals with inconsistent standards of violence.
Were not allowed to pass judgment on their former torturers. He went on to talk about how there were people and prosecutors who would superfluously ask for the death sentence, but they would be frequently moderated by Che and his colleagues. So yes, there were trials and executions during this period in Cuba, but according to John Lee Anderson, these trials were above-board, if-summary affairs with defense lawyers, witnesses, prosecutors, and an attending public. But there was also a number of arbitrary executions. The most notorious incident occurred when, soon after occupying Santiago, Raul Castro directed a mass execution of more than 70 captured soldiers. Raul's reputation for ruthlessness was confirmed. Now, those with a keen eye might be able to pick up on the fact that Raul Castro is actually not Che Guevara. Those are different people. Anderson goes on to say there was little overt public oppositions to the workings of revolutionary justice. On the contrary, Batista's thugs had committed some sickening crimes, and
I think that's probably also part of the reason why, because no one knows anything about the Batista regime, like in America. Well, Americans don't know anything about anything in general, but like they just think that these like random upstarts got together and we're just like, we're woke and we want to do woke communism. And that's why we're going to go kill a bunch of farm owners and people who fight back. Like that's, I think unironically, that's probably the American consensus on Che Guevara and Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, right? They were like a bunch of college students that got armed up and wanted to do woke. And that wokeness was demonstrated through mass murder and ethnic cleansing campaigns or something like that. Now, of course, this stupid ahistorical perspective is not helped by the fact that many Cubans living on U.S. soil also maintain a healthy dose of reactionary sentiment. So, you know, people's involvement with this process is kind of misguided, but you know.
the Cuban public was in a lynching mood. Che warned his judges to be scrupulous about weighing the evidence in each case so as not to give the revolution's enemies additional ammunition, but the trials had to continue if Cuba's revolution was to be secure. In a book by Paco Ignacio Taibo called Guevara, also known as Che, Taibo says this about the trials. Without a doubt, Che was in favor of the summary trials, but the tales woven by Cuban exiles in which he was the butcher of La Cabana presiding over most of the shootings in Havana are flights of fantasy. Revolutionary Tribunals number 1 and number 2 did sit at La Cabana, the first trying policemen and soldiers, the second, which did not pass death sentences, trying civilians. I really want to emphasize that. The tribunals tasked with dishing out civilian sentences did not condemn non-combatants to death.
Che sent many people, even the innocent, to their deaths.
Now, before you accuse me of using evil Marxist sources, Taibo's book was cited as a source on that Cuba archive entry on Guerra that we covered earlier. I'm using the same sources used by a website dead set on framing Che as the devil. To add to this, in a forum with PBS, John Lee Anderson said, "I have yet to find a single credible source pointing to the case where Che executed an innocent. Those persons executed by Guevara or on his orders were condemned for the usual crimes punishable by death."
I'm a first-gen Cuban American, and for years I grew up listening to older family, friends, and coworkers that would claim witnessing atrocities Che committed. It's been hard to shake off all those sentiments. Here, I'll give you a great example of this, okay? Robert Menendez, also known as New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez, openly corrupt American Democratic Party Senator Robert Menendez is of Cuban descent. And when he was caught with gold bars in his home, Robert Menendez, also known as Gold Bar Bob, in this pay for play scheme that he engaged in with halal meat distributors from Egypt, Robert Menendez claimed that he actually had this epigenetic memory because his family had escaped the communist Cuban regime with gold items that they had in their possession before the violent genocidal communists got to them. And that's why he, had this fear, and that's why he maintained these gold bars. Okay? Robert Menendez's family did not escape the Castro regime. They escaped under the Batista regime. They escaped to the United States of America, escaping Batista. So why is it that a former American Cuban senator is lying about his background like this? That, I think, plays a pretty decent, that plays a good role in understanding the mindset of a lot of Cuban Americans. Similar process to Marco Rubio's family, I believe. I think a lot of American Cubans just, maybe due to like collective hysteria or due to like the initial people that escaped Cuba being of a the kind that was collaborating with Batista's regime, have developed this alternative perspective on the history of Cuba. Not all Cubans that came from Cuba were landowners, like wealthy landowners, by the way. I'm not saying that at all. But I think even those who very clearly fled Cuba to escape the grips of the genocidal, actually fascist Batista regime, still maintain this position because of, I don't know, maybe collective hysteria, maybe wanting to feel a sense of belonging. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is. But understand that if you're first generation, second generation, third generation Vietnamese, okay, or first generation, second generation, third generation Chinese, or Afghan even. Well, it's a little different right now because the war on terror is still going on. War on terror. Understand that a lot of your Iranian diaspora, a lot of your immediate family members, many of them came to the United States of America because they agreed with the United States of America's actions. Okay? That's it. And the same goes for Cubans, and the same goes for Venezuelans. A lot of people that come here often come here because they were collaborating with the people here. Not every single one, but a big chunk of people are coming here on that tip. So of course they're going to have a tremendous amount of resentment towards the country that they fled, right? Now, once again, and I repeat, not every single person is like this. I'm just saying that that's why there is oftentimes in diaspora populations this like cultural attitude that does not reflect the broader popular sentiment of the country that they're speaking about.
Death at times of war or in its aftermath. Desertion, treason.
Yeah, there's also shame, reading the room, wanting to fit in, wanting to not be victim to hate crimes, you know, and playing ball. Exactly. They knew that they couldn't just shout out about how they had to leave because they were collaborating with a heinous government. Or are there not American expats with similar stories conversely? I think, ironically, there are some, even though American brain rot, given America's global hegemonic superpower status, is so pervasive that it spans across the entire globe. That's why you have like white American dudes with like Chinese wives and shit who still shit on China and make YouTube videos about how fucking China's gonna collapse any day now. But yeah, there's a history of defectors to the DPRK, or a history of people that like literally leave America to go and live in the USSR as well. It's just not as common. But Iran's government is actually shit. All Iranians agree on that. Yes, I'm not talking about that. Like, this is not about. I'm not defending the Iranian government at all. I'm simply stating that initially the people that come here are brought here by the American government, and many of them are very pro-America. And we're not even talking about current day Iran anyway in that situation. There's also the diaspora tending to be wealthier and coming from wealthier backgrounds. That's true as well. I mean, I myself am literally a living, breathing example of this. When you meet people in the United States of America that come from especially like a poor country, how the do you think they got here? You know how rich you got to be able to leave a poor country and come to the United States of America legally? Are you kidding me? You think this stupid ass, racist ass country allows you to enter it if you're not guapped up, if you're not caked up? Let me tell you, that's not the case, okay?
Or crimes such as rape.
Anyway, let's continue.
Torture or murder. I should add that my research spanned 5 years and included anti-Castro Cubans among the Cuban-American exile community in Miami and elsewhere. From what we can tell, Che was far from a careless murderer. He actually seemed to be very cognizant and fair. This is not to say that he was a perfect man who did everything right with no room for improvement. I'm not trying to glaze too close to the sun, but these were incredibly stressful and unique conditions, and the evidence supporting the claim that Che was a ruthless and bloodthirsty murderer is weak. Was Che racist? Another claim that is often levied against Che is that he was a bigot. This is often used as a gotcha by conservatives who like to point out what they perceive to be the hypocrisy of left-leaning people celebrating a supposed bigot. It usually goes like this. Hey, left-wing college kid, you claim to dislike racism and homophobia, but you wear a t-shirt with the image of a racist homophobe on it. I, on the other hand, don't dislike racism or homophobia. I'm quite fond of both, but despite that, I still don't wear a t-shirt with Che Guevara on it because he cared too much for the poor, and that grosses me out. Anyway, my pregnant wife is not going to yell at herself. Gotta go. In all seriousness, there are some accusations of bigotry that can be fixed.
Lamau, this is giving Palestinians a homophobe. Palestinians are too homophobic. That's cringe shit. Yeah, I know. It's so stupid.
Fairly levied at Che. So let's take a closer look. Starting with the accusation that he was a racist. There are many fake quotes that are wrongfully attributed to Che in the attempt to paint him as a racist. One of which goes, "We're going to do for black people exactly what they did for the revolution," by which I mean nothing. This quote, while damning and definitely racist, can't be definitively traced back to Guevara. It's circulated heavily by Cuban American conservatives like Humberto Fontava. Holy killed that pronunciation, I think, who regularly spews outright falsehoods like Che helped to herd gay people into forced labor camps, which we will debunk later in this video. And Fontava is the source of this banger of a quote.
There's nothing funnier than like anyone who is anywhere near American leadership for decades on the homophobia of the Cuban revolutionaries, which is hilarious only because Fidel Castro literally apologized for it. Cuba is literally more pro-LGBTQ than the United States of America right now. It's constitutionally enshrined and protected. And also, Fidel Castro apologized for it like years before America even decided that gay people could get married or get legal recognition. That's why it's so funny when Americans are like, dude, you don't understand. They were doing so much. They were doing twerk camps.
The lily-white Che Guevara and Fidel Castro overthrew the mixed-raced Batista. Is bro trying to imply that Batista's mass murder campaigns were okay because he was mixed race?
He's woke.
What kind of
Batista
identity
was
politics?
DEI. He's a DEI dictator.
Bullshit is this? I refer you back to the CIA document about Batista's brutality. Also, I have a hard time believing that Fontava gives any semblance of a about racism, considering he collaborated with Bill O'Reilly, who made a litany of unsavory comments regarding race. Fontavo also authored a book about Che, and it's genuinely insane. It's just a really bitter, incoherent polemic that author Rolf Potts referred to as slightly schizophrenic. The Fox article from which I pulled these Fontavo quotes also can't make up its mind on whether or not Che was a racist. Right here it says, many of the people Che was sending to the firing squad were members of Batista's army, and these disproportionately tended to be black and mixed race. Batista himself was mixed race. And then literally 3 lines later it says, Guevara also at times, however, called for more black people to be represented in institutions and had black fighters under his command.
That's also bad because he was doing DEI. I'm going to hit it from every angle, okay? Yeah, Che Guevara, bad because he's racist, but also I'm a racist. So now I think Che Guevara is, I don't want to think too kindly of him. So I'm going to say, no, he was also doing DEI because he called for black people to be represented in institutions. Yeah, saying the Cuban Revolution was also racist is hilarious, but that's besides the point.
What are we doing here, guys? However, there is a genuinely racist quote that was written by Che, and it is worth talking about.
True.
Remember how I mentioned that Che was born in a well-off...
Okay, I'm just going to say one thing, okay, before we get to this quote, because I know what it is, okay? Your Honor, my client, Che Guevara, is Argentinian, okay? That's all I'm going to say. He's Argentinian. He's Argentinian. That's it. I mean, come on.
White family in Argentina and had a sheltered and privileged upbringing. Well, this upbringing came with blind spots. When he was a young man in his early 20s traveling around South America on his motorbike, he kept a personal diary, which is now a famous book called The Motorcycle Diaries. In this book, he wrote a horrific and inexcusably racist passage about black people. It goes like this. The blacks, those magnificent examples of the African race who have maintained their racial purity thanks to their lack of an affinity with bathing, have seen their territory invaded by a new kind of slave, the Portuguese. And the 2 ancient races have now begun a hard life together, fraught with bickering and squabbles. Discrimination and poverty unite them in the daily fight for survival, but their different ways of approaching life separate them completely. The black is indolent and a dreamer, spending his meager wage on frivolity or drink. The European has a tradition of work and saving, which has pursued him as far as this corner of America and drives him to advance himself.
No, why'd you write those words? No. Okay, let me tell you. Okay, I'm gonna repeat it now that you've seen the quote. Okay, he's Argentinian. Okay, he is Argentinian. Okay, and also, I think he more than atoned for his racist crimes of the past. But that's, you know, I'm sure that overzealots will get to that in a second.
Is correct. Yes, this is really bad and indefensible. And the man Che grew to be and the man Che was when he wrote this are very different. In order to fully grasp the context of this quote, we need to understand that this was written by a spoiled rich kid who had been largely sheltered from any form of intersectional analysis and was extremely racially insensitive. This is a quote from the beginning of his journey, and if you actually read the book, you can see this young 24-year-old grow into a very different man. He met with many indigenous people.
I do think it's very funny to be like, Che is racist, because he did objectively say racist when he was younger. And it's funny to say that, because the reason why you know who the he is not because he wrote the Motorcycle Diaries, okay? It's because of all the other shit that he did afterwards. And that's the reason why you hate him. And virtually every single thing that he did after that was directly fighting with arms, engaging in violent revolution against colonial powers, whether it be in Africa or in the Cuban Revolution. So, you know, kind of funny that all these actually currently racist white supremacist nerds will act like this is a big own.
People during his journey and noted how much better he was treated as a white man compared to them. At the end of his journey, he notes that he is no longer the person he was when he embarked on this trip. Quote, "The person who wrote these notes passed away the moment his feet touched Argentine soil again. The person who reorganizes and polishes them, me, is no longer. At least, I am not the person I once was. All this wandering around our great America with a capital A has changed me more than I thought." Clearly a story of growth and self-improvement, yet people like Marco Rubio feel the need to embellish and push a narrative that just isn't true. No, Marco Rubio, Che Guevara did not write extensively about the superiority of white Europeans. In fact, Che's effort—
Like, if he did that, you would like him. What are you saying? If he did that, instead of all of the other shit that he did, okay, you would actually like him. You would literally ride for it. He probably wouldn't have been assassinated. You know what I mean? Like, if that was his point and he just kept on that note and didn't participate in the Cuban Revolution, didn't go and try to liberate a bunch of colonial subjects in Africa, like, you would be a fan of Che Guevara. If he doubled down, tripled down, and became like a straight up white supremacist neo-Nazi, Marco Rubio would be trying to put a statue in his goddamn honor.
Efforts to remedy his disgraceful writings are impressive. In a 1959 letter to William Morris in Miami, Florida, Che Guevara writes, "Esteemed sir, I received your letter to pass on to our commander-in-chief, which I have done, but I would like to say that if any vestiges of racial discrimination remain in this country, our revolution will put a complete end to them. You can be absolutely sure that within a few years, any difference between white and black will be solely a question of skin color, as it should be." It's important to note that the US in 1959 was racist as hell. The Civil Rights Bill had not even passed yet, and the president who ended up passing it, LBJ, referred to it as the N-word bill, but that's a different story. Che was also loudly against apartheid in South Africa, and he even gave a now famous speech on this topic at the UN, where he said, "Once again, we speak out to put the world on guard against what is happening in South Africa. The brutal policy of apartheid is applied before the eyes of the nations of the world. The peoples of Africa are compelled to endure the fact that on the African continent, the superiority of one race over another remains official policy, and that in the name of this racial superiority, murder is committed with impunity. Can the United Nations do nothing to stop this?" He then, in the same speech, went on to detail the crisis inflicted upon the people of Congo and the role of imperialism in the appropriation of their land and resources. He actually cared so much about Congo that he left his post in Cuba, relinquished his Cuban citizenship and all creature comforts that came with it, so he could personally go to the DRC and try to spur revolution. This is not just some guy who overthrew a dictator and then bathed in the glory and lived a comfortable hedonistic life. For a guy who supposedly wrote extensively about the superiority of white people, as Marco Rubio claims, everything he wrote and did as an adult seems to directly contradict that claim. Was Che homophobic? Similarly to his distasteful comments in regards to race, a young Che Guevara could also be quoted making a definitely homophobic remark about a gay person. He referred to a man as a pervert and then followed up the quote by saying, "Apart from being a homosexual, he had been very nice to us." Yeah, really bad, indefensible, and just like his racist remarks that we touched on earlier, he said this as a young, sheltered, rich kid in the 1950s, and then he grew up. But see, if the conversation started and ended there, I would have no problem conceding the point that Che had said some homophobic. He is, after all, just a man, but
oh yeah, let's see you defend this one. Easy, Your Honor. He's hot. Also, not only is that very important, but also who the wasn't homophobic at that time? What are we talking about, dude? Are you crazy? Like what? Like the people that say Che Guevara was homophobic are homophobic now. Please. And also, once again, it's just like it's silly. Canceling Che Guevara because he's homophobic.
They go on to say that he rounded up gay people and forced them into concentration camps.
Your Honor, he's also Argentinian, and everybody knows Latin American men are very gay coded. So I am not a gay man myself, but I will say, I assume that the gays in this chat would give him the pass.
After the Cuban Revolution, some dishonest actors go as far as to claim that he murdered people for being gay.
Che Guevara executed gays, right? This is a guy, when you wear a Che Guevara shirt, you're wearing a Hitler who was less successful in being charismatic and duping people.
Now,
oh, God, I'm just, honestly, I'm just glad this motherfucker fell off, dude. Actually, he was such a rapacious scumbag. Oh my God. Oh, thank God. Thank God I don't have to ever hear his voice ever again.
This is just blatantly untrue. There is no verifiable record of Che killing people for their sexuality. What is often being referred to when people make this point is the UMAP system in Cuba. The UMAPs were military units to aid production, and people who opted out of military service had to serve their country in a different way, and they were sent to these forced labor camps. At the time, gay people were not allowed to serve in the Cuban military, the same way they weren't allowed to serve in any other country's military, and they were subjected to forced labor in these Cuban camps. It is worth noting that draft dodgers in the US were sent to prison, where the 13th Amendment turned them into literal slaves, but that's another story. Yes, the UMAPs were despicable and unjustifiable. No, just because the Americans did similar shit does not make it okay. There are also reports of gay people being mistreated and abused in these camps.
Yeah, good thing England, for example, would never do something. Oh, that's right. Britain castrated Alan Turing, the man who cracked the Enigma codes and saved countless lives during World War II, and then he ended up himself. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Undoubtedly was really inexcusable.
That's why it's ridiculous when people are like, oh, dude, these guys were so homophobic. Like, yeah, they were. Okay. And so was your grandparents. All right. Yeah, but they apologized, dude. Yeah. Well, you know who apologized for this process? Fidel Castro. When did he apologize for this? I'm going to look it up. I think Fidel Castro apologized for this at a time when they were still making homosexuality a crime in Western nations. Okay. Fidel Castro apologized for it when gay marriage was still illegal in America. Okay. Also, to this day, for the record, just so you understand, Cuba has a better constitutional protections for LGBTQ people than we do. Fidel Castro took the blame for a wave of homophobia launched by his revolutionary government in the 1960s, but said it happened because he was distracted by other problems in an interview published on Tuesday in a Mexican newspaper. Former Cuban president told La Jornada the persecution of gays who were rounded up at the time as a supposed account of revolutionaries placed in forced labor camps was a great injustice that arose from the island's history of discrimination against homosexuals. Yes, they do. Cuba has notoriously been one of the most progressive in terms of LGBTQ rights. There was a 2022 Cuban Family Code referendum. There's legal recognition to the right of marriage. In those moments, I was not able to deal with the matter of homosexuals. I found myself immersed principally in the crisis of October, Cuban Missile Crisis, and the war. And policy questions, official persecution of gays continued in the 1970s before homosexual acts were decriminalized in 1979. Today, Cuba's medical service provides free sex change operations. This article is from 2010. Fidel Castro publicly apologized for it in, I think, like 2008 or something. Okay. And they had sex change operations. I don't know exactly when, but Cuba only allowed same-sex marriage since 2022. No, they constitutionally enshrined it in 2022. But before then, I'm fairly certain that like the Cuban attitude towards, and it's not just gay marriage either. Also, we're having a conversation right now in 2025 where American politicians are salivating about how more creative ways of killing trans people. So, you know, are you pro-sex operations is so dangerous regardless of your views? Pro-sex operations. You got to do an operation to get some sex, chatter. Yes, I'm pro-sex.
Really bad considering Fidel Castro felt the
Free
need to issue
slime.
an apology for this dark period in Cuban history, saying, if anyone is responsible, it's me. The dreaded UMAP system ran from November 1965 to July of 1968. 3 years too long, if you ask me. But again, this video is not about the Cuban state. It's about Che Guevara. So what was he doing during this time? Oh yeah, he was in Congo. In April of 1965, Che
You need to adjust your mic sensitivity because we're going to hear you beefing out your crusted gamer hole. What the are you saying? What does that even mean?
relinquished his Cuban citizenship and left the country to spread revolution abroad. He left Cuba 3 months before the UMAPs were established. In a farewell letter to Fidel, written by Che on April 1st, 1965, he says, I formally resign my positions in the leadership of the party, my post as minister, my rank of commander, and my Cuban citizenship. Nothing legally binds me to Cuba. The only ties are of another nature, those that cannot be broken, as can appointments to posts. Che died 2 years after writing this in 1967, and the UMAPs ended in 1968. During their runtime, Che was in Congo, and then Bolivia, and then he was killed. He had nothing to do with them. Now, could Che have done more to stick up for LGBT rights in Cuba, especially during a period of machismo and ignorance towards gay people? Yeah, I'm sure he could have, and that would have been cool as. But again, this was the 1960s. That doesn't make it right. Homophobia was never right, but apart from a single homophobic passage written when he was in his early 20s, he was 24. Che was not this raging homophobe who rounded up gay people and threw them into camps or killed them. That just isn't true. In summary, in his youth, Che wrote racist and homophobic.
This is a really important lesson. Okay? This is a really important lesson in never posting, especially if you're a leftist, because anything you ever say, they clip chimp motherfuckers, dude. They clip chimp motherfuckers in perpetuity, okay? They'll do this to you literally like half of a century later. They'll still be like running the hits. It is so crazy. To this day, this dude is getting clip chimped for his old takes. It's wild, man. What have we learned today? We learned that the biggest crime of all time is being a leftist, okay? That's it. That's the number one crime. Nothing else. Nothing else comes anywhere near that crime. And it is the absolute worst crime of all, okay? You still get clipped for America Deserved? I know. And when they don't have anything, okay? When they can't even find anything, they just make it up, okay? They just make it up about you. They'll just be like, oh, well, he said something homophobic, so he genocided the gays. Oh, okay. Got it.
Things. We know he grew out of his racism, as his later actions showed. We can't say for certain whether or not he grew out of his homophobia, but we could infer that as he matured and became a Marxist, he rid himself of these bigoted ideas and focused on solidarity. There are no actions or writings from his adult life that suggest that he was a horrific homophobe, but without new evidence, we'll never know for sure. It's not uncommon to meet people who hate Che and the Cuban government for anecdotal reasons. I have people close to me who lived in Cuba under Fidel, and they really loved
You can be a communist without being woke and defend homophobe Castro? What? Okay, shut up. Take a day off.
him, but that's why we don't use anecdotes and we stick to empiricism. History is not made up of great, infallible people. It's made up of people reacting to their environments and...
I'm still learning about your brothel experience, and see, that's a great example. I've always been pro-sex work, dated sex workers, openly talked about going to a legal brothel in 2010, and still talk about how the brothel was raided Yeah, it was 6 years after I went to the brothel. Okay. And what it was rated for wasn't child sex trafficking in the way that these freaks talk about. Okay. It was goddamn rated for tax evasion. And the brothel actually still is in operation as a legal brothel and literally sued the German government and the police for defamation successfully. But motherfuckers still talk about it. It was in Berlin. It's legal. And it's crazy. People still go like, oh, Hasan is a trafficker. It's just like, you're such a pathetically unserious person. One of the main people that love spreading this, by the way, Sex Pestiny, aside from engaging in a litany of sex crimes, okay, both alleged and some that are currently being prosecuted, okay, also openly admitted that he went to an illegal massage parlor where he got a rub and tug by, in his own words, not mine, a woman that looked like she was trafficked. That's the mother that has been for years talking about how I went to a legal brothel. How crazy is that? And the dumbass rad femmes that run along with that still go along with this narrative. Oh my Lord. Go find a new villain, dude. Anyway. Plenty of them out there. Yeah. I didn't know this. Why do I have to learn more about them? I just think it's kind of funny and kind of interesting. All my haters happen to be of the exact same origin. It's not just rad femmes. A lot of Marxist-Leninists still bring it up too. Yeah, those guys are stupid, clout-hungry morons. Who gives a shit? Yes, dude, I know. Some of those Marxist-Leninists are like former sex workers who are now anti-sex work themselves, okay? There's that one. I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm not even going to dignify it. I don't care. Yes. Who cares? They just chirp into the void 24/7. You need to understand. This is just completely unproductive and silly. Remember, judge me by my enemies. Okay? That's all I'm going to say.